Morning. Well, first of all, I'm very sorry of missing tapas yesterday. I hope to have my share today. I'm going to talk a bit about our approach to analyze information coming from free software development. Well, in fact, the approach we use can be used for any kind of software development as long as the tools store the data enough for understanding what's happening. As you probably know, in free open source software development, most of the activity happens in the net. So we have tools for sharing the data, for sharing the source code. We have tools for talking about the source code. We have tools for talking about decisions, about what's going to happen in the future in the project, for taking decisions, etc. Those tools are, of course, source code management tools like Git, or ticketing systems like Bitergia or Launchpad or GitHub tickets, or code review systems like Gerrit or pull requests in GitHub, or mailing lists or forums or whatever. So as you know, in many projects, if the thing didn't happen in the internet, didn't happen at all. So that's why we can capture most of what is happening in those projects, and from that we can infer exactly how they are performing, how they're working, and things like that. What I'm going to present today is a very naive analysis. So it's very simple, because what we just did was launch the tools to the repositories and produce some charts. Of course, the data has to be validated and curated and things like that. So you have to look at it and see what happens, because every project uses things in a different way. I'm going to talk about that later with some examples. So consider this as a very simple draft of what can be done. But my impression is that the conclusions I'm going to draw from it are actually useful, but depend a lot of things like the kind of repositories we're using and the kind of analysis we were doing. So I will talk a bit more about that later. We selected 3 projects, Samba, OpenOffice, and LibreOffice, that could be relevant. And the nice thing about them is that they are very different, even when they have some similarities. So let's start. So the talk is going to have this structure. I'm going to talk very briefly about the context, the company, and myself. Then I'm going to talk very briefly about the study, how we the data and so on. And then I'm going to go into try to show some data about the process and the community. And at the end, I'm going to draw some conclusions. So with respect to the context, Bitergia is a company doing this kind of thing from a commercial point of view. An interesting thing about the company is that all the software they use and produce is free software, open source software. That means that if you want, you can use exactly the same tools and get the data and do your own analysis. Basically, the company is producing dashboards, producing reports, providing consultancy on the software development. And I'm also have another hat. I also work at the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid, and there I'm co-leading, in fact, the LibreSoft research team, where we have been working in software analytics for like 10 years. So in part, the company was a startup from the team. So about the 3 projects that we are going to talk about, as I said, they are interesting from several points of view, but one of them for this analysis is that they are widely different. And still, they have many similarities. So all of them are free software, of course, open source software. All of them are GPL, or mostly GPL, but they have different business models, different kind of communities around them, and they are using different programming languages. All of them are popular in a certain sense in their own area. But of course, they're working in different needs. They have very different market shares, and of course, very different targets as users. All of them have a story, but the story is very different. So you have like 20 years of history, for instance, for Samba, or close to that for OpenOffice, or much smaller for OpenChange. And as I said, all of them have a community, but the community is very different in size. So I like this because I could show the differences and when the analysis can show something and when cannot due to these facts. So let's go to the study. So what we did exactly? So first of all, what we didn't analyze things like functionality, performance in runtime, or popularity, things like that. So we have concentrated on analyzing the development process. And for that, we are studying in these slides mainly two parameters. One is processes, how they are performing, things like activity, or how they are performing in back closing or in code reviewing, and community, who is contributing different parameters about that. Basically, what we did is to launch the standard tools at the repositories and produce standard dashboards, which is the thing that you can go and see live in the links. This is the LibreOffice dashboard. Well, the main page, the main entrance, landing page for the dashboard is basically a summary of the different data sources that we're analyzing. So in each row, you have one of the data sources. So for instance, in this case, here on the top, you have source code management, Git in this case. Then you have, I guess this is code review, right? This is code review. In the case of LibreOffice, this is Git. And tickets, this is Baxilla, well, mailing lists. We did the same for Samba, and we did the same for OpenChange. You can start noticing some very important differences. So, for instance, this is the people participating over the history of the project. So you have like 1,000 in the case of Samba, sorry, LibreOffice. You have like, well, more than 10,000 in the case of Samba. And you have like, well, a bit more than 30 in the case of OpenChange. This is the wide difference between the project that I already mentioned. Something that you can already draw from this is, well, exactly what we are doing is here we are looking at the author field in Git repositories. And well, depending on how the project is using that, this number can be right or not. So for instance, I know that for a long part of the history of LibreOffice, the authors are not tracked that way. So the real number of authors involved in LibreOffice is probably much longer, especially from the time that this was OpenOffice and so on. So in any case, let's go to the next slide, which is the first thing that we do when we come to a repository, and is what we call the transparency analysis. So from my point of view, this is very important when you are talking about free open source communities, because it basically means how much of your development information is out there so that anyone can come and look at it. So remember that if you stick to the definition, you can say that free open source software is basically when you can, publish the code, reuse the code, modify the code, and so on. So basically it talks about the code. But we all know that in many cases, knowing about the community and about how the software is being developed is very important. So that's what we usually call the open development model. Not all free software follows that. And when you go there, many projects, you cannot find a part of the information. So for instance, in some cases, you cannot find the defect information, the information in what you usually find in the issue tracking systems in tickets, because they keep it inside a company, for instance. So in this case, all of the projects have all the information available with some things that they will be commenting later. But basically, all the information is out there. And a nice thing is that even when both LibreOffice and Samba have a long story and they have moved from repositories to repositories, a large part of the history is also available. So it's not only a matter of what's available now, but what's available from the past. Well, here you also see the data sources that we analyze it. So it's basically Git, Git, GitHub tickets, GitHub pull requests, and mailing list. Yeah, question. Okay, okay. What that means is only that, well, we didn't found the repository when we went to your website. That's it. Nothing else. Okay. I will talk a bit more about that later. Thank you for the clarification in a way. Okay, now let's look about what we found about the process. As I said, this analysis is very, very basic. It's mainly activity. So you can, of course, do much more than that. But to stick to the basics, first thing is just looking at the history of activity. In the case of LibreOffice, I'm starting in 2010, because that's when the project started. If you look at the dashboard, you have more history than that. You have like 10 more years of history. The rest of the history, well, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because of different moving from repository to repository. Project started, if I'm not wrong, with CVS, then moved to Subversion, then moved to Git. And when you do those kind of things, well, the numbers are quite different. In addition, I know for a fact, because I've been talking to LibreOffice developers that for a while, people were getting contributions from others, but were not keeping the authorship, except for in the credits file or increments in the increments in the commit records. So that's why. Well, my impression is that since 2010, the information is pretty accurate, but for the past, probably it's not. So that's why for LibreOffice, I'm showing from 2010 on. These are commits. And you have to remember, a commit is a commit, so it depends on the developer and depends on the project. You cannot just say, I have the double of commits, I have the double of activity. But it's a first measure of what's happening in the project. Usually, if the project is not changing policies, at least you can compare it with the past. And you can see how the level of activity, well, is keeping sort of regular during a long period in this case. And you can also compare it with reviews, and you can see. Again, we analyzed what we found, and we found a great repository, and that's what we analyzed it. And you can see, well, it seems that they started to do code reviewing like 2 years ago, and you can see that right now they are reviewing like 400 commits a month, while they are committing like 2,000 commits a month. So they are doing code review for a part of all the commits, not for the whole thing. But again, you can see that the number of code reviews per month seems to be pretty stable. So again, the project is not going down, it's not going up either in terms of activity, but it's keeping stable, which is very interesting for such for a project with such a long story. You can also look at activity in other repositories. So this is in many cases even more interesting, because here you are looking at what are doing, what are people contributing with respect to problems found or things that they want to be done. So this is basically ticketing. Of course, again, each project is using the ticketing system in a different way. So depends the level of activity depends on the policies and the uses of the system. But again, if we look at these are tickets closed, we can see that here we have a level of activity that is increasing, except for this peak here. You can picture how it's around 500 tickets closed per month, and it's a bit more than that, so it's probably around 700. On the other hand, you can also look at the mailing list, which is this one, and you can see how in this case the activity is decreasing. So that's something that is happening in most projects, and the reason for that, you know it, Stack Overflow. So in many cases, comments, questions, discussions are coming to Stack Overflow, mainly when they are initiated by users. Users no longer ask questions in the users' mailing list, they go to Stack Overflow. So in many cases, you can find a correlation between how traffic in user mailing lists go down while questions and answers in Stack Overflow go up, basically at the same time. But in any case, you can see that activity in the mailing list of the project is slowly decreasing. This is Samba. For Samba, as I said, we don't have code review, but we have activity. Again, you have seen a very interesting pattern of stability. Forget about the tail here, because what happens is, if you know how Git works, here we don't have the commits that are going to be committed in the next months, probably, but with an author date of the past, let's say, of these days. So remember that we are taking the the author date. That means that if I author a patch today, but the patch is merged from 2 months on, during these 2 months, the patch is not there. In 2 months in the future, the patch for today happens to be in the repository. So forget about this, and basically you can see a very stable pattern of activity over time. And again, if you look at the tickets, well, here the activity is a bit different. So this is closed tickets, and you can see how it's very varying, and it's not that high compared to the other. But there are spikes. So if you look at a mailing list, well, I have a problem here. This is a bug I noticed it a couple of hours ago. I couldn't fix. So you can see that the level here is 1,500. So this is not 0. right? So the level of activity is keeping around 1,055 and 1,500 messages per month. So it's pretty stable again for a long time. And please realize that we are starting to measure here in 2006. So this is like more than 10 years of the project. So this is a long time for being that stable, in this case, in the case of mailing lists. But if you came back to activity, it's again the same. OpenChange, of course, as I said, OpenChange is a smaller project, and you can see a different trend here. So it's growing. The activity pattern, well, with spikes and usual changes over time, but it's clearly increasing. While they started to do code review like 1 year ago, and there are no tickets before 2014. So I don't know if that's because they had another tracker, or that's because they didn't use a tracker before that. With respect to mailing lists, well, they had a steady traffic for a while, but now it's very, very close to zero. So it's like tens of messages a month. Another view of tickets. Now let's come back to LibreOffice. This is how they are closing versus opening. So that means how is the project copying with new back reports, feature requests, and so on. So here you can see that the blue line is closed, the green line is open. You can see how usually the green line is over the blue line. There are spikes like here. Probably at some point the project either decided to actually close more bags for some reason, or they closed all bags, because in some cases the project does go and decide, okay, let's close all the bags with, like, I don't know, 2 years that are 2 years old, so that because they are probably no longer relevant. But despite of that, you can see how during the last year they are starting to cope. I mean, they are like closing all the tickets that are entering. So again, that can be policy. So in some cases, that only means, well, they are closing all tickets that are six months old, for instance. They have a bot doing that. Or they are really looking at the tickets and closing them, let's say, the right way. But in any case, from the numbers point of view, it seems that they're copying. And this is the same for Samba. Again, we have a lot of story here. And you can see, as usual, how the green line is usually above the blue line, but they are very, very close. Maybe during this period, they are having much more tickets than they are closing, but again, they are copying here, and they have spikes at some points, again, because of these reasons that I already mentioned. Well, for OpenChange, we have a very short story, so we cannot say a lot, but, well, it seems that both lines are very close to each other, so, well, it seems that closed and open have a similar pattern. Code reviews. For LibreOffice, this is reviews pending, so per month. So that means how many reviews somebody submitted a patch for being reviewed, but it's still not decided, either reviewed or abandoned. You can see a trend, an increasing trend, but not that much, and it's kept usually around 50 per month, which is not that high considering that they are having like 500 per month, if you remember the number from some slides ago. And this is what's happening with the reviews. So red is reviews abandoned, that means they were not accepted. And here you have submitted and merged. And you can see how the lines follow very closely the others. That usually means that the project is responding with a reasonable velocity to pull requests or to code review requests. And they decide quickly whether they are merged or whether they are abandoned. And the ratio of abandon is relatively small compared with other projects. For OpenChange, well, the story is much shorter, but we can see a similar trend here. Blue and green lines quite similar. Maybe they are starting to abandon more code reviews, but, well, the story is short. It's very difficult to know yet. The number of reviews pending is growing, but there's around 5, so it's not a matter of trouble. And now the second point, the second area, the community. So again, LibreOffice. And again, I took January 2010 as the starting point. So the numbers try to reflect the structure of the community. So we found, again, as I said, as authors in commit records in Git, a bit more than 1,000 developers. And this split here is these guys did like 80% of the commits. These guys did like 15% of the commits. And this guy did like the rest and 5%. So this is the people really doing the software. This is very usual in most communities. You know, you have a long queue of people doing just a small number of contributors. But depending on the project, the relationship between core and casual can be higher or lower. So this is pretty healthy, I would say, because the number is big enough so that you don't really depend on a very, very small team of people. So you have three, four. Remember, not all of them working at the same time, of course. So this is for the whole period analysis here. But still, that's a big number. So it's not easy that from today to tomorrow, half of them are going to leave, putting the project into risk. Here you have another interesting metric, which is total number of authors per month. I mean, authors active during that month against number of new authors during that month. You have to take this with a grain of salt because we are not doing email addresses matching. That means people change email addresses. And if they do that, they're going to be detected as new authors. But since the period is not that big, not that large, it's like 6 years. So, well, probably just a few people change email addresses. So this can be sort of the actual numbers. And you can see how they are getting a steady flow of new contributors, which is very interesting, because that means that the project is still attracting people, even when they are keeping a large base of contributors around 100 active per month. So we can say that right now, the community is like 100 authors per month, so that's probably the people contributing, and it's like 10 people entering every month. Well, contributing every month, so maybe they are leaving later or whatever. This is for Samba. Again, as I said, forget about this. So this is not relevant. So you can again see how Samba is still attracting new authors. Remember that the problem with the new email addresses here is bigger because, of course, the history is much longer. So that it's more likely that people are changing email addresses during that period. But still, the project is still attracting new authors. They have a very good base of active authors, and it's very big in any case. Remember that we are analyzing a lot of repositories from Samba, so you have to consider the ecosystem as a whole. With respect to OpenChange, well, project is smaller, so you have a very small core, so that's the usual thing for this kind of project. Still, the relationship between core and casual is a bit bigger than usual. But, well, they are attracting new authors, so, well, project is healthy from that point of view. This is not a kind of analysis. This is just a very rough analysis about where people contributing are coming from. Well, in this case, this is for messages. So depending on the mailing list analysis, this is basically saying where do people contributing in mailing lists come from. So for this, we are using the date in the email message, which is usually the date from the sender machine. So in some cases, mainly when you are using cloud and so on, the time zone could not be okay, but usually it is. So that means that in most cases, this is a reliable source of information of where people are coming from. Of course, you cannot tell apart Africa from Europe, for instance, because we are in the same time zone. But you can get an idea. So here you can see this is basically the United States West Coast. This is the East Coast. This is South America. So it's like well, Latin America and Brazil. And here you're entering Europe, so this is UK. Remember that we have both in the States and in Europe the summer time zones, which are one time zone apart. So this is basically UK, and a part of UK is also here. And you have Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And you can move on. This is like India. And well, after that you have China, and you have Japan somewhere. And this is probably Japan and Australia. So I should be looking at that. So you can see how for LibreOffice, which is this one, well, they have a very geographical diverse community, but it's very much centered into Europe, could be Europe and Africa, but because of other reasons, you can now, this is basically Europe. And the States. They have same people also in Asia, but well, the comparison is quite different. And this is OpenChange. For them, well, they are mainly a European project, you can see here. This is another kind of chart, which is trying to structure the community a bit. So this is like the demographic charts that you can see for general population. And the idea here is in yellow, you have each generation, each cohort, how many people they entered. So that's, for instance, this is for LibreOffice. This is how many authors, how many new authors they had 5 years ago. So this is in 6 months periods. So you can see how, like 5 years ago, like 100 people were entering, were joining, were being authors for first time in the project. So like 4 years or 3 years ago, whichever, they were even 125. Now they are a bit lower than that. So this is, in some sense, the attraction of the project. So how many people enter the project every period. In blue, you have how many people remain now from that generation. So for instance, that means that 5 years ago, like 100 people entered, and from those, still like 20-something are still in the project, are still actively authoring code. So you can see how, as usual, many people leave. Remember that we have all the contributions here, so maybe somebody just contributed once, and of course they are not going to show up in the next generations. So, but you can see this is the blue line is basically the retention. So how many people are still retained? If you compare yellow with blue, you can now how well the project is retaining people over time. And you can also very quickly have an idea of whether you have people with experience in the project or not, and whether people older in the project tend to be more or less likely to leave the project, for instance, over time. And it's very interesting, I don't have it here, but it's very interesting the evolution of this pyramid over time. So how was this pyramid like 2 years ago and how is today? Because you can see the variations there. So this is the same for Samba. Please remember all the things that I said with people changing addresses, for instance, and people not being in authors, but being authoring and so on. But forgetting a bit about that, again, you can see the same thing. You can see how they have been remain attractive over time, and well, how they are retaining very well, given the numbers. So both projects are retaining very well compared to other projects out there. So it's very common that you have retention rates of around 30% for generations like 3 years old, with both projects are basically keeping. And I'm almost done. So some things to remember, I guess I mentioned them, but just in case, this is just a first draft. So we usually go through the data, work with the projects, and try to understand the policies, and try to really extract the right data. So for instance, as I said, authoring data usually have to be enriched with other information like people mentioned in commit records, for instance. The selection of repositories, configuration, etc. can cause large differences. So that's the case of Samba, for instance, depending on which repositories you consider, while the numbers are widely different. Well, we cannot define good or bad. In any case, it depends on your target. This was just what we thought, but you can go use the same tools and do the same analysis if you want, with the kind of parameters, with the kind of repositories and so on that you may want. So look at the details. You can go to the dashboards too, and they are live. You can go there, play with them, and draw your own conclusions. So for me, the bottom line is these projects are really transparent. So this is something that you cannot do with, of course, with proprietary software. There is no way of knowing how the software is developed, except for what the producer says. And this is again not true for some free open source projects developed behind the curtains, so in a company, for instance, and they don't tell us how the software was developed. So for me now, about the community, for instance, is very important, because the main reason I now Samba or LibreOffice is going to be there in 10 years from now is because they have a very lively and healthy community, and that's what really guaranteeing that the project is going to have a future. And that's something that our numbers, I can go there, I can look at the data, and I can get my own impression. I don't depend on an analyst or on the company saying I'm going to maintain this product in the future. You can go there and look at the community. Same for processes and so on. Well, we tried to check all the data, there can be errors, etc. If you came from one of those projects, you are more than welcome to signal any kind of errors or trouble. And if you want, you can get the JSON files for all the charts and so on, and you can play for them. All of them are in the dashboard, and if you go to data sources, you can find out where they are and so on. And well, in the end, my impression is that in the free software community and in the open source community, it is more and more important that show me the numbers. You know, they show me the code, and everybody knows about it. But show me the numbers when you are going to use software, and you need to know things like, is this software going to be here 5 years from now? How many people is actually supporting this software? How are they reacting to tickets or to bug reports or to new contributions and so on? So you don't need to rely on anything else but the numbers. You can go there, measure, and get your own conclusions. And that's something which is unique from this community. So that's something that we can do, and that probably we should do when we are taking decisions about which software to use. You have the whole presentation and the dashboards online, as I said, so feel free to go there and play with the thing. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
When you have many repositories, how did you choose which one to follow? Because in the Samba case, I'm looking at it online, and the numbers are a bit off because I think you brought in some kernel clone.
Yeah. When we do this with a customer, with a project, basically the first thing is to work out with them what exactly we want to measure. In the case of some of all the projects, basically we want two repositories, and we get what they said that were the repositories. And in the case of Samba, that's why I mentioned before that depending on the repositories, you're going to get different numbers. And that's because you have a lot of, well, I don't know if you came from Samba, but well, you have them. You have many forked repositories from somewhere else and so on. And all of that is going to be, it's included. From some point of view, that means the whole Samba ecosystem is using that. So if you're interested in that, that's correct. If you're interested only in what the Samba project is actually doing, first thing, of course, is to go there and really select those repositories where you are actually working, and probably that's much more smaller. But I wanted to show the whole thing because it basically shows the whole ecosystem. So probably you need all of that code in one way or another, otherwise you are not going to have it there. So when we are using Samba, in fact, we are relying on all that number of authors, and that's the idea. As I said, depending on what you look for, you can design the dashboards in a very different way. If you are interested only in what did the, I don't know, Samba project or a Samba core project or whatever produced, probably you have to be a lot more selective with the repositories. But thanks for the comment.
I have a question. Is it possible to draw some predictions based on the data? You already mentioned that based on the data you have seen, at least the LibreOffice and the Samba community seem to be here to stay. In 5 years' time, they will be here because they are very active. They are getting new contributors. Can you make some more predictions based on this data?
Let me change the question a bit. So for me, the nice thing is that you can try to make predictions if that's important to you, because you have the numbers. I mean, you don't have to rely on a crystal ball or something. So you have the numbers. And if you have a model for prediction, you can actually apply it to the numbers, and that's it. So from my point of view, predicting human groups, which is in fact what we have here, is very difficult. So it's very difficult to know whether the LibreOffice community is going to be as healthy as it is now in 10 years from now, but not because of the numbers. Maybe because people lack interest in tools like LibreOffice for some other reason, like technology change, and people start to work in mobile phones and they don't need that kind of things. I don't know. So if you forget a bit about that, for the rest, you can, of course, try to extrapolate trends and so on using different kinds of models. I'm not sure they are reliable enough because, you know, predicting the past is easy, but predicting the future is a different story. But, well, you can at least compare. And you can say things like, okay, this community has been there for 10 years. They have like, I don't know, 100 contributors. And they seem to be attracting more and more people, like 20% new people every month and so on. And you compare with this other product. This other product has a community of 10 people. They've been here for 5 years. They are not really attracting anybody new. You can compare. and from that you can infer. Of course, maybe the second one is going to become very sexy, and the next year they're going to attract 1,000 developers, and they're going to grow very, very quickly, or not. But the most likely thing is that, well, the first one is going to be here in 10 years from now. The other one, well, you don't know. That's the kind of thing that you can do. But I don't very much like saying you can know how the project is going to be in the product in the future. You can say things like, well, if everything keeps sort of like it is now, you can sort of know what's happening. So, for instance, if you look at this pyramid, and having into account that it's very unlikely that people, once they departed from a project, they're coming back, you can infer at most how many people with, say, 5 years of experience in the project you are going to have 10 years from now. At most the people here, no more than that. Well, that's not a prediction, that's a fact. If that's important for some reason, I want to know that I'm going to have people with experience and so on. So that's fine, because from this you can at least know the lower limits or the upper limits or things like that. You can do the same with most of the charts. Well, as you said, this is not answering your question, but sort of. Yeah. There's a question over there.
How easy is the software that you use to set this up? How easy is it to set it up for another project?
That's a good question. So I would say that there are like two parts in the software. So one is the part retrieving the data from the repositories. That's metrics grimoire. That part, I would say, it's pretty stable, pretty easy to use. Many researchers, for instance, are using it. You can go to the Git repository and have an analysis in, I don't know, 3 minutes, depending on the size. And you can go to Bacilla. Bacilla is a bit slower, but you can also get the repository, the database quickly. So if you're basically interested in the data, I would say it's easy and it's pretty doable for any kind of repository. If you're interested in the charts, that's a bit different, and that's different because this is a moving target. So right now, both the analytics, all the process is basically you go to the database, you do some querying, you produce JSON files, and you visualize the JSON files with JavaScript. So both the querying is done in Python, and the visualizing is done in JavaScript. Both the querying and the visualizing are moving, because while there is a lot of room for improvement, and we are the main contributors to the software, and we are trying to improve it. And that means that almost from month to month it's changing. So if you want, talk to us. We can try to help you as much as possible. And there is an automated process from the beginning to the end. If the automated process works, it's very nice. You just configure it, and sometime later the dashboard is produced. But at some point, and in some cases, some steps in the chains may fail. But you can talk to us, and we can try to help you. So we are very interested in having people using this outside the company.
I can resist the question. Are you using, are you doing dog fooding with your own product? And what does it tell you of yourself?
You know the URL. Yeah, well, he can tweet it or something. I don't remember the URL, but we are doing it. We are doing it. I can say you, even without the numbers, the community is very small. For metrics grimoire, which is the part getting information out there, well, there is a community there. But the rest, all the things about querying and visualizing and so on is basically the company right now working. But yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. Yeah? Over there.
What source code management system and what backtracking system and what review system do you have? Connectors or data gathering?
Pretty much all of. Let me. There is a list in the Bitergia website. Basically, everything which is supported there. I guess it's here. Well, you have the packages, the pricing, and so on. But go to the get more details, and everything which is here is supported with free software, and you can get the free software. So go to the right, and you can have, for source code, we have Git. Through Git, we can support Bazaar, Mercurial, and we also have native support for Subversion, and probably CVS, but we didn't test it for years. For tickets, we have GitHub issues, Bacilla, Jira, Redmine, Launchpad, Allura, Taiga, and maybe something else. For code review, Gerrit and GitHub pull requests. For discussions, basically anything that provides an inbox format. So Mailman, Gmail is automatic. You just write the URL and that's it. And Discourse, Stack Overflow, Google Groups, if you have a bot that basically retrieves it and put it into an archive. Library forums, Fat forums, Askbot. For chat, we have IRC, Slack. For downloads, we have Apache, HTTP, and MediaWiki, and Meetup. And maybe something, I'm missing something, I don't know. So.
And how easy or difficult it is to add, for example, a new tracker system or a new code review?
Depending on that, can be very simple to moderately simple. So for instance, a tracker, we have a tool which is called Bicho. Bicho currently have like 10 different backends, all of those. So basically you can look at the different backends and you can very quickly now what you have to implement. But basically you have to implement, you can realize how I get back, how I get comments to back and so on. If the thing has an API, it's very simple. If not, you have to do more complex things like dumping the database and analyzing it or something like that. But if the thing has an API, it's not that simple. For somebody familiar with Bicho, and there are some people outside the company familiar with Bicho too, I would say it's probably a matter of, I don't know, 10, 20 hours. It's really simple. If you are not familiar, of course, you have to first understand how Bicho works. Others are more difficult. So for instance, for Wiki, we only have MediaWiki supported. So that means that if you want to support a DokuWiki, for instance, well, probably you have to tinker with that one because really doesn't have a backend because only have one. So that's the thing. But picture that the only work of these tools is getting the information from the API, putting it into a database. That's it. So it's not that difficult either. So I would say Bicho probably is not having more than 2,000 lines except for the backends. So it's not that difficult. Okay, any more comments, questions, something? Okay, thank you very much.